what's the biggest myth that needs to just die, like right now?
Yeah, we won't have jobs. I hate that one. Like, it's such a scary thing. Okay, first of all, we will all have, the jobs will be different. If we let go of the nature of like, what is a role? What even does it mean? What is a job title? Maybe we don't have job titles.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show, the home of Googlization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy, never normal shift going on all around us. Our goal is to bring you ways to reimagine tomorrow and explore the ever-changing convergence of people, business, and technology. Here is your host, Ira Wolf.
If life today feels like a runaway roller coaster, buckle up, because today we're cranking the speed up even more. You've heard me talk about how it's not change itself that is worrisome, but the pace and scope of the changes we're experiencing. In my book, Recruiting in the Age of Googlization, I wrote that the lines between science fiction and reality were blurring. That was 10 years ago. Fast forward to today, and that gap isn't just blurred, it's shattered. About a year ago, I first met today's guest. Her keynote presentation blew me away. Back in the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic, while most of us were stuck in some endless Zoom calls, Sam Rad was busy breaking reality itself. She created her digital twin, Sam Rad 2.0. The video she shared in her presentation was mind-blowing. What once seemed like something out of Black Mirror is now within reach for anyone with a smartphone and a few basic skills. Which begs the question, what is real anymore? And more importantly, what does it even mean to be human in this new digitized reality? So stick around. This is a conversation that is going to get real interesting. Most people know Sam Rad as a futurist, but Sam identifies herself as a student of humanity and a technology pioneer. She is the founder of Radical Next, a meta-media studio and strategic consultancy creating transformative stories, experiences, and media productions that shape the future. Her upcoming book, by the same name, explores how we find ourselves at a crossroads of history and what comes next. It will be available February 11th and is titled, appropriately, Radical Next, Reclaiming Your Humanity in a Post-Human World. Let's welcome Sam Rad. Well, welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
As I said in my intro, it's just about a year ago that we met for the first time at the Avanti Summit, and at another conference soon after that. And I was just, as I mentioned again in my intro, it was mind blowing. I've seen a lot of keynote presentations. This is my thing, future at work. Been writing about it for 20 years, and so hear a lot of keynoters, see a lot of stuff, and then go, yeah, heard it. You blew me away with Sam Rad 2.0 when you showed the video. I immediately went back and said, is there a way that we can do this? Over the year, there's a lot of software that's come out, and now it's almost mainstream that we can do that, where you programmed it yourself. But it's crazy. So you've got your new book coming out just in a few days. And tell us about it. There is Radical Next.
Product promo. No, it's actually because the cover is something my favorite part of writing books. Though this is only my second, though there's two more I'm already working on after. I know you can't stop. I'm a very wordy person. If you you did see me speak on stage, so I could definitely speak for hours, as evidenced by this brick here. But it's called Radical Next, Reclaiming Your Humanity in a Post-Human World. And generally, when I was thinking about sharing the story, and the original subtitle was The Operating System for the Future, which has been basically a talk that I've given for a decade. I mean, I don't give the same speech every time. I write a new speech every time, but the general idea framework was I had seen these trends where basically our social organizing paradigms on the level of self to all levels of society had begun shifting or even breaking down. And this was through the lens of either trust in institutions, trust in media, pretty much anything that is an organizing force for human societies. And so a lot of the work that I do has been to prepare people to imagine future possibilities, to navigate this type of change, which of course is catalyzed in part by new and emerging and accelerating technologies, right? And it's a convergence of multiple technologies. It's not just the technology du jour, which might have been generative AI, and before that, it might have been metaverses or blockchains, and coming up, it might be quantum computing. But it really is, kind of a big shift. And the book takes you through these operating systems, really going from our inner worlds, from how we conceive of self and identity, to systems of language or communication or community, to work or healthcare or manufacturing, economy. And then we go a bit further out into planetary and interplanetary systems, or even systems even beyond that as well. So towards the end, I do go a bit far out there. I am a futurist, and I wouldn't want to let folks down by sticking to, the totally grounded concepts. But most of the book is really helping us frame our thinking through this change. And a lot of it's not really, I didn't want to put myself and my ideas so much in it, as it really is a Socratic guide of questioning to help guide the reader, or whoever picks this up, to think through these things. And it should feel kind of uncomfortable and provocative. Even myself, I've written this, right? And I've reread it thousands of times. And I was doing the audiobook recently, recorded the whole thing, which it was a big project given 500 pages. And I'm sitting there getting angry at myself, every other line. I'm like, I said this. And then, I get to the next line and I'm like, oh, good. I say, it's kind of like a really, there's a lot of tension in it, which is something that I think we're all feeling in moments like this, like big historical moments of change. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of, there's a pitch on what it's about, which is the future, and also kind of the human element of the future. I am an anthropologist, so like team human, people watcher type job, but also the feeling of it as well.
There's so much to unpack there. He said so many things. I said, I'm going to ask her that question. No, I'm going to ask her that question. I guess the one, and just on a simplest base, I guess I'm not shocked, but I'm somewhat surprised. Doing the audio version is, why not use AI?
Oh my goodness. This is a great question. And first of all, I've built a lot of systems, early systems like this that did this, speech to text, text to speech, audio, years ago. And now it's obviously quite simple to do that. I feel like, Sam Rad AI, which is the deep fake you're referring to, was actually sitting right here. So it could be
who
me.
Are you talking to? Is this the real Sam Rad?
I know, but I like to play with people about that, but I think you can tell the difference, the human soul behind something. And I tend to believe that, there is a connection between what we're doing and sharing, that you can hear through a voice, or see through a likeness, or experience on stage, or through the words. And it was really important to me. First of all, I'm a speaker. I'm a public speaker. I speak as a living. So
you're not sending in your hologram yet?
No. And, the reason I did this is my own sort of existential dread, like cloning myself to be like, everything that I do will be replaced, so that I could speak intelligently to people sitting in a room thinking they won't have jobs, or their industry won't exist, or something, to say, look, I kind of went ahead and did this, replaced myself, made myself redundant a number of times. And I'm here to say, you won't be. And then you also have the choice whether you want to be or not. I mean, I've seen plenty of these AI emulations of videos and stuff on the internet, and I'm like, I don't necessarily feel a connection to it. But for me, it was a lot of fun. It was one of the most difficult things I've done. I've never been so self-aware of my articulation or sounds in the mouth and all of these things. But it was almost like a boot camp for me to get better at what I do and what I love to do creatively.
Yeah, I share that with you because I do the editing of the podcast. And,
amazing.
And I've done like 450 podcasts over the last couple of years, and plus other, almost everything that we've done. And you get so self-conscious. It's like, oh, how many times did I say, pause, fumble over a word, and again, which is the human part. And I had to get to the point where if you take out all those flaws, then do we become robotic? Because is that part of what is that not the display of emotion or of empathy, but and again, we're all human, we're all vulnerable, we all make mistakes, we all fumble over some words. I heard this a couple years ago. I don't know if you've done a TED Talk, but I did one a few years ago about make change work for you, which is what we're talking about. And it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. I mean, yeah. I've been frustrated over things that I do, and the imposter syndrome peeks in as, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was, or what am I doing on this stage? And I really forced myself through it. And then afterwards, I heard Harry Hamlin, who used to be on LA Law and a couple other shows in the past. So for anybody that's probably younger than 30, you have no idea who I'm talking about. But I heard him and they said, oh, you just did I think he was on Jay Leno at the time, or maybe Jimmy Fallon. And he said, you just did a TED Talk. And he said, it was terrifying. And he went in, he says, I'm driving down Wilshire Boulevard, going to an appointment or to something. And he said, and people must have thought I was crazy. This is him talking, thought he was crazy because he's sitting there talking to himself. Now, I guess with earbuds and everything, it's not so unusual. But he was just talking and talking and talking. He says, because he kept rehearsing it. And he said, it was terrifying of doing this 15-minute presentation flawlessly and knowing it could be seen by millions and millions of people. And I remember being on the gym, and I do the Stairmaster, and talking to myself, just going over the presentation over and over and over again. So hearing yourself is terrifying. So
it is a boot camp, that format, and that was a popular format for some time. I started speaking publicly like a decade ago, and I had been put through a number of, never really, I don't believe so much in training other than trial by force. And I happened to be kind of thrown as a young person, just like get on stage and do it and learn as you go. But the shorter talks, 15 minutes or even 30 minutes, really challenge you to be precise. I remember a few that they would run the slides, right, without a clicker, but on a timed reel. I don't know if the TED experiences are like that. So you would have to be very...
There was another event that I did that. We had 5 minutes.
I was like, heck no, never. For me, in my ideal world, and if you thought this speech that you saw was cool, I would love just some sort of interface where I'm like generating the pictures in my head at the time I'm speaking, and it's all... I improvise. So on one hand, I write things, of course. I want to know where I'm taking the audience on a journey. And of course, I create all the supporting materials that you've seen, right, which should feel like it's a documentary that I'm narrating more than like a management consulting presentation.
The story.
And, those just support the story. They actually help me as the little cue cards to know I'm on track. But beyond that, nothing is scripted. And that has been a part for me that for many years ago, right? When I was starting out, either because I had not proven myself yet, or because it was still a time or an era of wanting perfection and wanting perfectly rehearsed places on a stage and pacing and this and that. My style was not something that people were comfortable with. And over the past few years, it's now something that people desire and want and seek out. Right? Not just the imperfections, but knowing that something is happening, a one of one, a unique experience on a stage with an audience that is not a teleprompter. And nothing against those, but
No, I get you. I share that same. Occasionally I've been asked to give a back-to-back, especially in a session. So, and the presentations are completely different because the audiences are different. It depends on the dynamics. And, I'll in my head is, well, that didn't work in the first time. Let me try something else in the second. So I don't think I've ever given two identical presentations, even though the slides are the same, the titles are the same, the pacing's different, the tone's different, the dynamics are different. What I emphasize may be different each time. Before we go down the road about TED Talks and presentations and speaking, which will all be important in the future. Let's go back to kind of the book and some of the changes. There's two things that frustrate me a lot. And one is helping people understand, and you're doing this more widespread than I am, helping people understand how quickly things are changing. And you talk about it as the age of acceleration. And we've talked about it, accelerating pace, and it's the scope. People just don't seem to get it, especially now that we're kind of going back to the way it was, politically and otherwise, that people are just hanging on to their memories and attempting to I won't say slow down progress, because that progress always means that it's better, but slow down change. How do you, and what's your magic bullet? How are you getting people to not only read the book, but to understand that life's going to be different, but it's going to be different faster?
Whether I'm the one, I open the book with some scenes of when I used to be a skydiver. And it's not, I was never one to push someone out of an airplane, but it's sort of one of these things where, whether you're ready or not, that change is happening, to jump and take the leap of faith. Sometimes that happens when you have control over it. And sometimes there are moments in all of our lives where that type of, like, the change will find you, whether you're trying to hide from it or not. And that sometimes manifests in uncomfortable experiences in life, whether that is in the workforce, right? Reorganizations, change of roles, needing a new job, and fear around those things. That's often, that could be an example of it. There are plenty of life experiences we all have where that change kind of hits us across the face or slaps us on the head.
Fires in California.
The
federal government was probably the most secure job in the world, which doesn't seem so secure as of today.
Yeah, I come from a completely, almost, I wouldn't say outside of the system perspective, but I was always an entrepreneur, and I lived, at least in my work life, never understood what comfort felt like. There was always, do we have three weeks of money to pay employees, let alone not paying myself or co-founders? Not always, right? It kind of got to a successful level, but I know that feeling. You never get rid of that feeling, and you can become comfortable with that feeling and still enjoy life and thrive within periods of uncertainty, and grounding oneself. And actually, I call it learning to surf, just kind of flowing with that a bit more than resisting or trying to control it, and being in a state to actually perceive what's happening around you and then make calculated decisions about it. So I'm not a very forceful person, as I mentioned. When I'm on a stage or writing this book, it's an invitation. And also I say, you can put this down and think I'm completely insane. Like, it's all if people want to feel more secure staying for a little bit in a comfortable paradigm. We do still need that. I don't advocate for a complete and total reimagining of everything at once. That simply would not function. We have a lot of really great infrastructure, especially on the societal level, in levels of governance or economy that works. But it's tough because I try to stay away from working with fear or exploiting fear. We have so much of that in our society, and that people don't need more people fear mongering. But what I've noticed is when I do address it head on, because I feel it too, and I've said it on stage, you probably saw me share that about creating replacing myself, right? Like literally trying to replace myself. I felt complete existential dread, not just fear, like, oh my goodness. And that's healthy. And I think my goal is to be optimistic and work through these things in a healthy way to imagine what's possible. In periods of transition like this, there are so many vacuums that allow for potential futures. Now, with the power vacuums, they're also going to be filled. Nature abhors a vacuum. So anything is going to try to fill that. And usually bad actors will do this as well. So I think just kind of like holding one's center to navigate it is a lot of what I try to help people to do.
Just a couple of weeks ago, and you may be familiar with him, John Sani.
Yeah.
He would either just through our mutual worlds, but I know he was with Singularity University too, which I know you were involved with. He said exactly the same thing, and we talked about this, and he said there's so much fear put in that you're going to lose your job if you don't change, you don't adapt, you don't learn new skills, and people, there's just too much of that, and it's just not effective. So it's really creating almost the FOMO, fear of missing out. But here's what the future could be like. And again, the world of abundance, it certainly fits into that role, but then that becomes almost incredulous. Like, can that really happen? And somebody shared that it's not necessarily, what you have to address is not necessarily the fear of missing out, but what they called FOMO, which is fear of messing up. And that here's the world, but I'm not good enough, or I'm too old, or I'm not good with math, or I'm not good with computers, or I don't understand that. And I'm safe now. I'm in my little cocoon. But if I try something new, I don't even understand all this AI stuff. I don't understand all this technology. I don't want to look like a fool either. I don't want to mess up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sort of a shame in our culture that we, whether it's in the workplace or in general, have created a, I wouldn't go so far to call it psychologically unsafe workforces, but environment. I used to do a lot of work with helping people get to a place of an innovation mindset. And really what is that? It is an ability to take risks. And the safety, the feeling that you have a safety net to do it, and an emotional and psychological one as well, not just you're not going to lose your job and your financial security. And, that part of that is where we see this convergence of leadership work, corporate development work, but personal development. It's so important. And actually, I think some of the best ideas and innovations come from a place of lack of experience or naivete, because you don't have the conditioning, which is really just sort of shackles almost, or at least like a pretty rigid perspective. If you don't have that, who cares what age you are, right? It's almost better to come in and say, okay, I'm going to play around with this AI stuff or chatbot. Maybe you'll actually have perspectives on it that people who've been so deeply entrenched in it would never know. And someone told me the other day, sometimes, the best mechanics don't make the best drivers. And this was in reference to the AI chatbots. They had asked me to see if I could playfully reverse engineer one of them using some narrative techniques. Like I made up a whole story of fairy tales and stuff. And it was a very interesting experience because if you told someone who's more of an engineering mindset, which I have engineering capabilities, but I wouldn't say that's my dominant way of thinking. It was something I developed to basically support what I do. Like I can do this too. But I came in from more of like a linguistic writer's mindset. And it was actually more effective than had I come in with the traditional programming mindset.
Your background, it's so interesting because you're coming from a completely different place than most people, because you weren't coming from a consulting or a business role. You're anthropology, and then again, and even the engineering principles and linguistics and your understanding of that is very different than where most futurists come from, and so it's a really unique perspective. Let me ask you this question, which is similar to what we talked before, what's holding people back. What's the biggest myth that you about the future of work, or just the future in general, but since I focus on the future of work, what's the biggest myth that needs to just die, like right now?
Yeah, that we won't have jobs. I hate that one. Like, it's such a scary thing. Okay, first of all, we will all have, the jobs will be different. If we let go of the nature of like, what is a role? What even does it mean? What is a job title? Maybe we don't have job titles. Maybe we don't even have organizational structures that we've seen today, right? And that's a scary concept. If I'm saying, wait, we have all these systems that are based on W-2 and 1099 and like entire social paradigm and tax structures on it. Could there be a future? Could those things change, right? And I go way out there of like, let's just have an imagination about it. I'm not advocating for or against it. When you start to go down these rabbit holes, really, of infinite possibilities, I think the present becomes a lot less scary. And the thing that is the biggest myth in the present, I don't know if it's still sticking, but it definitely over like a year or two ago, it was like the thing. Like no one's going to have jobs. AI is going to replace us all. I think there's probably new things happening in more current events that are continuing to fuel that fear. And I actually think this is one of the best times in history to explore new roles or possibilities, build businesses. The barrier to entry to pretty much do anything is low. Of course, that makes things more competitive, but it also unlocks a lot of possibilities for new business, new ideas, et cetera. So,
I mean, even with that, so the first question that I would get with that, well, what kind of jobs should we look at, or which type of jobs should we have our kids go to? And as rapidly as things are changing, I think the latest I saw was that some of the skills that we're teaching today have like a 2.5 year shelf life, which is down from like decades before. But so even saying, well, what career should I pursue? I hear what you're saying, and I want to continue to work, and I'm willing to do it. So over the next 2 to 3 years, I'm going to develop new skills. But things are changing so rapidly that some of those skills may not be in high demand then, either because you're too early or too late.
Yeah, I mean, that's always, first of all, I say the skill and the number one role of the future, at least right now, I'd say is cybersecurity, hands down. And this is if you want a more grounded answer. As more and more of our infrastructure continues to move into a digital realm, and then those interfaces that we use, not just this computer, this camera, the phone in my pocket, but are becoming closer to in or on the body, whether that's through brain-machine interfaces or haptics or VR, AR. These things will happen. They're happening soon. And so we need more people to secure these systems. But skills, right? I think it's more on that, learning to unlearn and learn. And this is more of I come from a liberal arts background, and it's something that is heavily contested, continues still to be, because Some of the majors have gotten a bit ridiculous, and I would agree with that. But really, it's the interdisciplinary nature of learning these skills to constantly pick up new skills. Even when I did learn to code as an engineer, and I was always tinkering and building stuff as a kid, but really did this formally. It was like the programming languages, the du jour at the time, or the frameworks around them, were shifting. So it wasn't so much what is your competency? Are you fluent in, well, Python is still useful, but for me, I moved into some other things, and it was more once you learn one or how to learn that and work with different things, it becomes easier to learn others. So similarly with the skills, it's the curiosity to have a bit of self-driven education and to get over that sort of fear of messing up, as you call it, just experimenting, learning, trial and error, make mistakes in a sandbox. Don't do it on production. If you're leading a company, don't be like, I'm going to take the whole company in this direction, at least not first. But it is correct what you are saying, that it's hard to say here are the top 5 skills unless those skills are things that would have been previously perceived as soft skills, which I've been rebranding now as essential human skills, which are the creativity, the critical thinking, the discernment, the ability to learn, the curiosity.
Right, and I think the World Economic Forum in their Future of Jobs report that just came out, I think was cybersecurity number 1. I
didn't see that report, but I'm glad we're aligned because I've been going around.
Pretty high up there. It was pretty high up there. So 1, 2, and 3 were technical skills, and I'm pretty sure number 1 was cybersecurity. Is again just with our shared relationship with Vanti. Certainly that would be front and forward. But 4, 5, and 6 were where I focus. And again, you've already hit upon many of those. Working on just generally is adaptability. Yeah, and even for cybersecurity, in order to be effective and successful in cybersecurity, you have to be adaptable because somebody's going to come up with something new tomorrow and lay it on your lap, and you've got to figure it out how to both either remedy it or prevent it in the first place. But when we looked at adaptability, one of the skills you mentioned was not only learning and again that curiosity, but the ability to unlearn. And again, it's not a brain dump. I mean, we have no way yet, I guess, with Neuralink.
It is. I mean, I didn't do this on stage with you, but I work with different techniques with permission to encourage things like neuroplasticity or unlearning from a scientific perspective. I had an HR conference and we did the Macarena backwards. Now, it sounds whimsical and fun, right? Think about it. So it came to me.
That's taking crossing your arms the opposite
you go
way.
No, this way. It go behind.
But that's taking it to a whole nother level.
Yeah. Oh, see, I still just did it. Look, see, that's how quick the brain remembers a pathway. So I was out for a walk, as I do. I walk quite a bit every day. My brain is going, ideas come. And I was like, that song came on my playlist. I don't know why. And I was like, can I do this backwards? And I was able to figure it out. And I decided, I had a very incredible organizer who I went up to that morning, was like, can I try something kind of fun? And they were like, sure. And it was a hit and it really worked. And I got a lot of feedback that people were able to unlearn, right? Because we have this behavioral conditioning and 40% of our actions are dictated by habit. I play a lot with exercises related to habit, but it did make me think with cybersecurity in particular, where the environment is constantly shifting and creativity is such a part of what criminals will do, right? It seems like they're quite adaptive, and yet people who are not criminals don't really want to think like criminals, which is another cybersecurity related talk I'll do. It's called Think Like a Criminal, Act Like an Agent, like be a bit more whimsical with it, to be adaptable to this changing environment and some of the threats that would not even be something you could ever imagine based in things from the past that we might have seen.
I love that. I can envision, I teach a class in innovation and entrepreneurship. I can envision doing the Macarena backwards to get
do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to the unlearning, just real briefly, since we hadn't talked about this, under adaptability, the group that I work with identified five skills, and again, I love that they're not soft skills, but essential human skills. One is grit and resilience, which goes hand in hand, and especially as an entrepreneur, you need both, and certainly resilience, bouncing back. It's not only bouncing back, but bouncing back faster. We sort of hinted on the growth fixed mindset. With imposter syndrome, certainly that's a big play. And again, how do you unlearn, which goes into the fear of messing up? How do you unlearn if you have a fixed mindset? Because the fixed mindset is, I've already done this and I'm comfortable doing it. I'm an expert in doing it. Now you're asking me to do something different that I may not be an expert in. And so that unlearning is the process to get there. But if they're so entrenched in that fixed mindset, that needs to be worked on. So that's another one. And then mental flexibility, which I describe is having multiple realities at the same time. There could be two truths at the same time. These come back from my HR days a couple years ago, 25 years ago, when I was doing a lot of competency lists of companies wanted to identify. And the two favorite ones that I identified from one of the organizations that developed the list was dealing with ambiguity and dealing with paradox. And that I think is what got me interested in this. It's like, that is the future. How do you deal with ambiguity and how you deal with paradox? And it took a long time for those to become really essential skills. So we look at grit, resilience, growth mindset, mental flexibility, and learning as five of these core skills of how do you build adaptability. And again, curiosity is part of that, and all these things. It's complex, and but there's a pathway forward, which is what we're both trying to share, I believe.
That's good to hear. It's one of, I think, all what you've listed and what you work on is so important, and simultaneously some of the hardest things to teach. I mean, I almost would argue you can't. It must be experienced through process or through things that I'm sure that you work with people and develop. I mean, it can be taught on some level, but that's I think why we're faced with these challenges at this point in time, because the skills that are required of us, which are innately human superpowers, I would say we're fully capable of this. There's a lot in terms of what we've been able to do as a species, that we clearly possess them, but perhaps we've not honed them as much as we should have in the more modern era. And we're now moving into a time where certain things, let's say cognitive abilities, which we've already outsourced to calculators or computers or search engines, we can further outsource, but we shouldn't be doing these things if we also don't have the skills to discern when or how we're delegating or adapt to changes that might occur.
So let's go look forward, because we're coming toward the end here. Hopefully I can keep you another few minutes here. So if you're designing the workplace of, we can do 2030, or we can go far as out as 2040. What's one thing that you would tell an organization, a leader, that they have to build in? And what would you tell them to?
Like looking to the future. So incentives, which is a big concept of what we do when we're creating an organization, right? Whether the purpose is to achieve a goal that is value creation or something else, but that's generally what they are in their purpose. We've seen a lot of evolution in that respect in terms of organizational structure and governance, corporate governance, or even like what is the purpose of an organization that's ties to greater ideas around economy, et cetera. I think thinking about the structures around how people, not only how they are incentivized, but what will incentivize them in the future, because people and society will change and their needs will change. Not to say don't pay people, but right, that definitions or ideas around what motivates people And are these things, do they look like employees? Do they look like contractors? Do they look like something else? Are there salaries? Is there financial exchange? Is there something else? Is this participation and revenue share? Is this ownership? Are people actually more motivated by ownership than they are actually salary? Do we need that in the future? So that's a very complex answer to say. Yeah. Perhaps consider what that is. I came through the Silicon Valley peak era, building startups, right? So meanwhile, down the street, you've got like chief Googlization officer. We've got, folks like that are, you have like a full catered lunch and childcare and all these things paid for. And, our little company was like, we can provide you lunch and these things, but it was something that was required of opportunity to learn and grow, develop that grit. But, it turns out people were not really, the retention rates were not as high with those companies still. And it was the question at the time when some of those programs fell apart were, well, then what's really motivating people? Okay, is it employee incentive plans? Is it benefits? Is it stock? And especially with the younger generation, so Gen Z, Gen Alpha, which I am by no means their spokesperson. I am not either one of those generations. But they are much more driven by values and some other intangible things. So it'll be interesting to see how to align people in organizational structures in the future and what that means for our existing infrastructure.
And two things come to mind of two people that I really enjoy talking to, like you. One is Zach Mercurio, and he's been a guest a couple times. He's coming up with a new book, but his focus is on mattering, helping people feel like they matter, which it fits into what's the future of humanity. How do you is compensation, which we don't, people need, obviously paychecks to keep food on the table and shelter and a roof over their head, but is just treat people like they matter. And again, that's the one. And then Josh Dreen was just on. I just spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, and scary title, but it's not what it's. Employment is dead, but it's really in traditional employment is dead, which is what you're talking about, especially with the decentralized organizations and the evolution of what organizations are going to look at to some degree. But he talked about compensation by contribution. It's like for people, and again, for people that just show up and want to pick up a paycheck, that's another issue. But for people who feel undervalued because they're putting the time in and they've created an idea, they've created the innovations, and it's almost in the past is, well, you were the patent is ours because we were paying you to contribute, where that model is almost going out the window.
I mean, intellectual property in general, I think is also something, I'm not saying it's going out the window, but it is going to go through a radical rethinking, right? We're in the midst of that right now, of what that even looks like. Can we create it if it's being stolen from a security perspective too? There's corporate espionage and all this stuff. But, I've been on the receiving end of that too, even with my own companies, like it have some patents, invented some stuff. It's cool. It's cool to say my name's on it. Do I own the rights to it? No. And that's a really good point. Again, what I've advised people, just even for incremental steps, this is not like do it on the organizational level, but even on a project-based level, like experiment perhaps with, different alignment of incentives or ownership or participation in upside. I don't know how that looks. I experiment with that even in my own life. I've thought about fully decentralizing Sam Rad, not to talk about myself in the third person, but like the entity that is Sam Rad, that is different from.
Hey, you got a trademark now, right?
Sam, I do. That was a whimsical little journey, right? It's always sort of an experiment, but for people who participate in all of these things, I'm at this point sort of a one-woman show, but not like alone in the world. We collaborate, right? But it's collaboration of individuals or individual LLCs or things like that for a technicality. how do we share in that in a way that we're all incentivized? So again, I think it's something where experimentation is good in a
Sounds
safe
like
way.
a future for the DAOs, right? The decentralized organizations and blockchain, huh?
Maybe. I had a conversation earlier today of some people thinking about doing that, and I have a lot of experience in that space. I haven't really, to
You
be
have a book
honest.
on it.
I do. I know. I talk about, in the work chapter here, of course, address it, but I think it's a stepping stone. And I don't know if that's where we're landing. It was definitely an era where there were new experiments in these incentives and governance, but there will be something beyond it. And I don't know if a fully automated, tokenized, smart contract based set of systems, those could be very dangerous. For example, I had seen some companies in the past experimenting with tracking contributions, as you mentioned. So let's say you've got 100 people. My contribution to, let's say, a project, we'll use this book as an example, like I wrote most of it. Editors did some stuff. You're now tracking things, right? Like we already do with time, or how do you measure the value of someone's ideas or charisma to keep something going, or project management. When you start tracking on such a granular level, which again, I know many organizations do, I think that's fine. But when you put it into an automated smart contract tied to money, you've now created a system that does not have the human element and can quickly become like China's social credit score or something a little bit creepy. Yeah, and there's something so beautiful about the human element in work or human resources. I don't even really like to call them resources, or human beings. That I would like to see a future that brings more humanity into work in the workplace than less.
And that's what your book's about. That's why you're a student of humanity, right?
I mean, I don't say this from a optimistically naive perspective in a way of like, okay, let's all like kumbaya our way into the future. But it's definitely something to keep top of mind when we're out of balance. Vision.
Sam, you and I probably, this is really a dangerous format for two people who like to riff.
Yes,
and go down these paths without scripts. But this has been totally enjoyable for me, hopefully for all the listeners as well. I like to wrap things up. Two things. The first is, I have a question. Is there anything that we should have talked about that we didn't?
That could be an endless list. I'll say we talked about a lot of things.
Okay. And the next one is, how do people get in touch with you? How did they get your book?
Yes, that's a great one. Well, I'm Sam Rad, so it's sam-rad.com. You can find the book there. Radical Next is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all of the booksellers that you might enjoy. So you can, search for it there and it should pop up. And we'll have, of course, the Kindle and audible version of it, which will sound like 20 hours of this.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure I will listen to it. We're taking a very long trip in a few weeks, and I'm looking for lots of audio.
Wonderful.
We can take along, so that'll be perfect. I appreciate it. It's great to see you again. Thanks very much for joining me. Again, if anyone thought that they were going to get a finite answer what the future of work and the future was going to look at, we're still writing the preface. I think we're not anywhere near coming up with what the final answers will be, which I know that strikes fear into a lot of people with that ambiguity and paradox. But it can be a fascinating journey, and I hope more and more people will take it, and with your guidance and pick up your book and listen to your other interviews. And I know you're around, so hopefully people will get a chance to hear you as well.
Great.
Okay.
Well, I'm also an open book myself, so you can find me all over the interwebs and social media, and I'm responsive there as well.
I'd encourage everyone to connect with Sam on LinkedIn. as well,
Mhm.
and subscribe to her newsletter or blog. I'm not sure which it is, but I know I get it, or both.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks, Sam. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. Be sure to listen to the podcast and follow us on YouTube.